The clink of ice in his glass was the first thing I heard when I stepped into the den. It was later than I ever came home from the office, and the city skyline outside our penthouse windows pulsed with that haunting kind of beauty only Chicago could offer. I had paused in the hallway, just beyond the arch, my heels still on, coat still buttoned, briefcase in hand. That's when I heard his voice. Nathan was slumped on the velvet sectional, a bottle of Glenfiddich beside him and his phone glowing softly in his hand. His words slurred, but they hit their mark, clean and sharp. Monica? She's stable, strategic, reliable. But Elena, God, Elena was magic. I didn't breathe. Not at first. She made me feel like I mattered, he went on, raising the glass to his lips. Monica made me useful. That's not love. That's a job title. I stepped back, slowly, into the shadows of the hallway. I didn't want him to know I was there. Not yet. Let him keep talking. She built all this. He gestured weakly, whiskey splashing, but it was never mine. I'm just the husband in the background of her empire. I should have fought harder for Elena. My heart didn't break. That's the part people never understand. It didn't shatter or ache or bleed. It calcified. It hardened like steel forged in fire. I felt the burn, sure, but what was left inside me was unbreakable. Nathan didn't even realize I was watching as he mumbled, groaned, and eventually collapsed sideways into the couch cushions. The Rolex I'd given him for our 7th anniversary glinted mockingly under the lamplight. He looked peaceful, pathetic. I stood there a long moment, staring at the man I had trusted with my home, my legacy, my son. Then I turned on my heel, walked quietly to the guest room, and locked the door behind me. Sleep didn't come easy that night. Instead, I sat at the edge of the guest bed, looking out over the city I helped shape. All the developments, the contracts, the clients, the relentless hustle that made me Monica Harwood, none of it had prepared me for this. Not the betrayal, no, I'd always expected betrayal in business. It was the insult that stuck like a shard beneath my ribs. He never chose me. He settled for me. By the time dawn began creeping in through the edges of the blinds, I had made my decision. Not out of sorrow. Out of strategy. I didn't want revenge. I wanted clarity, precision, control. And I would get it. I slipped into the master bedroom before he stirred. He was still snoring, one leg thrown over the back of the couch like a frat boy after a tailgate. I took my toiletries, a fresh change of clothes, and my laptop. I wouldn't say a word until I had everything in place. No confrontation. No fight. Just silence and a smile. I walked into the kitchen just as Caleb came down the stairs, rubbing his eyes and yawning wide. My son, 14 years old, smart as hell, and way too observant for his own good. Hey, Mom, he said, dropping his backpack by the counter. You're up early. I forced a smile, as if nothing inside me was coiled like a loaded spring. Big project starting today, I lied, flipping pancakes on the griddle. Gotta beat the contractors to the site. He studied me, eyes narrowing just a bit. Dad's not up. Nope. Rough night for him. Caleb didn't ask more, but I saw the flicker of awareness in his face. He always knew when something was off. Maybe it was growing up around negotiations and boardroom tension, or maybe it was just Caleb being Caleb, an old soul in a young body. Whatever it was, he was watching me carefully. You okay? He asked, softer this time. I'm always okay, I said, placing a pancake on his plate and ruffling his curls. Eat up. You've got history first thing, don't you? He nodded but didn't touch the food right away. If something's wrong, I can handle it. You don't have to protect me from everything. I froze for a second, then leaned down and kissed the top of his head. I know you can. But let me protect this one for now. I watched him eat, my mind already racing. By the end of the day, I would begin unraveling the life Nathan thought he was entitled to, and I would do it without raising my voice, without lifting a weapon, without even slamming a door. Let him have his Elena. He would soon learn what it really cost to build a life out of lies, and what it meant to lose everything to a woman who never lost. I made the call 2 days after the whiskey confession. The moment Caleb left for school and Nathan dragged himself into his shower, I was already standing by the window of my office, phone pressed to my ear, watching the morning traffic snake down Wabash. Tessa Monroe, Chicago PD, how can I? It's Monica. I need someone discreet. I cut in. Preferably someone who doesn't blink twice at dirt. Tessa exhaled a soft laugh. I haven't blinked since 2016. What kind of dirt are we talking? My husband. There was a beat of silence. I'm listening. I didn't go into detail on the call. I never do. Tessa had been my best friend growing up on the South Side before my father's last deal pulled us out of public schools and dropped me into marble hallways with silver spoon classmates. We lost touch after college, found our way back in our early 30s. She'd risen through the ranks in white-collar crime, while I carved out the skyline with steel and glass. We met that afternoon. Neutral ground, quiet cafe in Wicker Park. I handed over a folder with Nathan's digital trail, login credentials, shared bank account screenshots, even a GPS tag I'd discreetly attached to his Range Rover months ago when his late nights became routine. He's not just cheating, I said, watching the foam on my cappuccino dissolve. He's hiding something. I want to know what. You want me to tail him? I nodded. And whoever she is. I want names, places, everything. I don't care how expensive it gets. Tessa smiled grimly. You always did play chess, not checkers. A week later, I had everything. Her name was Elena Ward. She ran a nonprofit clinic on the Gold Coast. Pictures of smiling nurses and pediatric patients peppered her website. The irony nearly choked me. She looked pristine on camera, all tasteful pearls and soft cashmere. But Tessa's report told a different story. She's been meeting him at the Wilcox Hotel every Thursday. Registered under different names. He pays with a cash card, sloppy. Tessa flipped through surveillance stills, placing them on my kitchen island like tarot cards. But here's where it gets interesting. That clinic she runs? Major inconsistencies. Donations coming in from Nathan's shell corporations. Red flags all over her 501c3 filings. I didn't blink. Just nodded, jaw clenched so tight I felt it in my temples. And Monica. Tessa paused. There's something else. She handed me an envelope. Thick. Official. I opened it with steady fingers until I saw the name, Caleb Hale. And the words, DNA results. I didn't say anything, just scanned the page once. Twice. The result hit like a sucker punch. Probability of maternity, 0%. Not biologically mine. The room spun for a moment. I gripped the edge of the counter to steady myself. Of course, Nathan would try to build his perfect life on a lie that grand. But he had no idea who he was dealing with. I folded the paper carefully, tucked it into my coat pocket, and looked at Tessa. He's still mine, I said, voice flat. Blood means nothing. That boy is mine because I raised him, kissed every scraped knee, studied every homework packet. I chose him. And I will destroy anyone who tries to take him from me. Tessa's expression softened. I know. That night, I stood in Caleb's doorway for a long time, watching him sleep. His face was peaceful, eyelashes casting long shadows across his cheeks. I didn't know how much he'd overheard over the years. Kids see more than they let on. But I would protect him now, ferociously, strategically, completely. The next morning, I began my moves. First, the accounts. I froze the credit cards linked to our joint business, rerouted expense approvals to my private office. I called my team's lead counsel and flagged several pending audits on Hale Development's finances. Nathan would be locked out of every major financial lever by Friday. Second, I pulled my ownership records. Every property, trust, and shell company I built, each one was documented in painful detail. I had spent 13 years ensuring Nathan couldn't touch my empire without my say-so. Now I just needed to bring those safeguards online. By noon, Nathan called. My Amex isn't working, he said, irritation dripping from every word. And my brokerage account, did you reset the password? No, I said smoothly. That's odd. You should call the bank. Monica. I'm in a meeting, I cut in. We'll talk tonight. I hung up. I didn't care about his panic. I cared about the endgame. The third move was the boldest. I reached out to Elena's clinic posing as a donor interested in funding, outreach, and financial transparency. Within 2 days, I had a copy of their last 2 annual reports, and my accountant found more holes in them than a block of Swiss cheese. As the days passed, I could feel something shift. Nathan grew quieter. Caleb grew watchful. One night, Caleb knocked softly on my bedroom door. I was reviewing asset transfers on my laptop. Can I sleep in here tonight? I looked up. Nightmare. He hesitated. Sort of. I shut the laptop. Of course. As he crawled under the blanket, he whispered, I know something's wrong. You don't have to lie. I paused, heart tight. Then I said, I promise you this, Caleb. Whatever happens, you'll be safe. You'll be loved. You'll have me. He didn't say anything after that. Just pressed his head to my shoulder. In the dark, I stared at the ceiling, listening to his breath even out beside me. One piece of paper may have said I wasn't his mother. But I was. And that was final. There are moments as a mother when your heart swells so much it chokes you. I had one of those moments the day Caleb walked into my home office holding his iPad like it contained the Ark of the Covenant. His face was pale, his hands tight on the edges, and I could tell immediately he knew something. Or worse, he'd seen something. I found these, he said. No preamble, just truth, raw and waiting to be heard. I didn't mean to snoop, but Dad left his laptop open last week. I saw some weird emails, so I started saving them. I froze, fingers hovering over my keyboard. What kind of emails? He slid the iPad across the desk. From her. Elena. And from Dad, too. He has a second email account. Gmail. It's not even hidden well. I took the device with careful hands. On the screen were dozens of screenshots, emails, texts, attachments. The earliest one dated back 3 years. This wasn't a fling. This was a relationship. An ecosystem of secrets and planning, of money wired and vacations scheduled under aliases. Elena called him Nate. Nathan called her Elle. They shared ideas for a future I'd never been invited into. They were talking about a life without me. And they had been for a long, long time. I looked up at Caleb, who was trying so hard to be brave. You shouldn't have had to find this, I said, voice low. He shrugged. I knew something wasn't right. Dad stopped looking at you the way he used to. You stopped laughing at his jokes. Even the air in the house feels different. I walked around the desk and knelt in front of him. You're so much more grown than I ever realized. He cracked a tired smile. You say that every time I do something adult. Well, stop doing adult things then, I said, pulling him into a tight hug. Let me carry this. No, he said into my shoulder. You don't have to carry it alone. I'm with you. I didn't cry. I couldn't afford to. But that hug, God, it broke me wide open on the inside. Later that night, I texted Tessa a single word, meeting. She showed up an hour later in jeans and a bomber jacket, a manila folder tucked under her arm. I've been digging. We sat in my office, just the two of us, with the door closed and Caleb asleep upstairs. Tessa opened the folder. Your instincts were right. Nathan's not just cheating with Elena. He's funding her. And not in a cute, here's a little love donation kind of way. He's laundering money into her charity, diverting funds from Hale Development. There's a clear trail. How clear? She tapped a document with her nail. Clear enough that if the feds saw this, they'd put both of them under investigation within 48 hours. And the clinic? Tessa nodded grimly. Falsified patient numbers. Inflated payroll. Some of the staff don't even exist. It's a scam built to look noble. The kind that collapses the moment someone kicks the wrong stone. And Nathan's motive? Debt, Tessa said simply. A lot of it. Gambling. I blinked. You're kidding. She handed me another sheet. He owes close to $3 million to a man named Damian Cross. Underground poker games, private betting clubs, offshore crypto platforms. And guess who co-signed one of the investment accounts? Elena. I didn't know whether to laugh or scream. Nathan Hale had always been a man who played by rules he thought didn't apply to him. He was charming, yes. Charismatic, even. But underneath all that, he was small. A man who never wanted to build something himself, only to siphon power from people who could. Tessa leaned back in her chair, arms folded. What do you want to do, Monica? I stared at the pile of paper between us. Then I reached for my phone and opened my contacts. I scrolled through until I landed on a name I hadn't touched in years. Ray Lopez, Chicago Tribune. I'm going to build my own net, I said. Finance. Media. Law. I want allies. People who owe me favors. People who've been waiting for a crack in this power couple's facade. Tessa raised an eyebrow. You want to go public? Not yet. But I want everything ready when the first domino falls. The next 2 weeks were a blur of calculated movement. I reached out to board members of Hale Development privately, presenting my findings carefully, piece by piece. I contacted a financial crime journalist who'd once begged me for a scoop. I even invited Elena's ex-boyfriend, who she dumped back in her political socialite days, for coffee, knowing he still had a grudge and access to certain back-channel circles. People began whispering, then talking, then aligning. I was no longer the betrayed wife. I was the strategist in stilettos, the queen who had seen the board 4 moves ahead. One night, as I stood on the balcony with a glass of wine, Caleb joined me, resting his elbows on the rail. You seem calmer, he said. I'm not, I admitted. But I'm in control. And sometimes, that's better than peace. He looked up at the stars, then asked, Is this the part where everything breaks? I sipped the wine and smiled softly. No. This is the part where it all begins to come together. It started with a flash drive. Nothing fancy, just a sleek black USB stick handed off in a nondescript brown envelope by a quiet man in horn-rimmed glasses who worked in Hale Development's accounting department. He said nothing as he slid it across the table at our meeting downtown, but his eyes, haunted, tired, told me he knew exactly what kind of fire he was handing over. I took it without a word, nodded once, and left the cafe. By the time I reached my car, I already had my contact at the Tribune on the line. I have something, I said. You'll want to sit down before you plug it in. 3 days later, Nathan's name was smeared across every major news outlet in Chicago. Real estate powerhouse linked to charity laundering and gambling debts. The headline was elegant, brutal, factual, and exactly what I needed. I didn't watch him read the story. I didn't need to. By the time it broke, I'd already moved out of the penthouse and into one of my downtown properties under renovation. Caleb was with me, tucked into a makeshift room with his books and gaming setup, while I worked late into the night with lawyers, PR teams, and quiet enforcers of corporate truth. By noon, the office phone wouldn't stop ringing. Board members, clients, investors. The local business review called it the most calculated takedown of a golden couple in recent memory. Good. Nathan tried to reach me. 10 missed calls. 3 voicemails. 1 pathetic text, we need to talk. No, Nathan. We don't. Because that flash drive? It wasn't the only copy. I'd already sent duplicates to the state's attorney general, the IRS, and 3 investigative journalists with proven track records of finishing what they started. But the press wasn't the only problem he had now. Elena's face hit the front page 2 days after his nonprofit darling tied to embezzlement scandal. They used a photo of her at a gala, mid-laugh, hand on her chest like she was gasping in delight. That frozen joy made the fallout even more vicious. Donors began pulling funds. Her board of directors resigned. And in the very public letters they released, they cited ethical concerns, and a gross betrayal of public trust. One even included a scathing sentence that made me smile. The organization was built on hope, but crumbled under arrogance. Meanwhile, Nathan stumbled like a drunk through the debris. His press statement, crafted, no doubt, by some overpriced crisis firm, read like a man begging to be believed. This has been a misunderstanding. I trust the process will exonerate me. I love my family. Except there was no family left. That night, Caleb came into the living room holding his phone. "Mom, look at this." It was a video, Elena outside her charity's office, shoving a reporter's mic away, her voice rising. "This is character assassination. You think this is journalism? Who paid you?" "She's losing it," Caleb said. "She's so different from the woman Dad showed me pictures of." I turned toward him. "He showed you pictures of her?" Caleb nodded. "Last year. Told me she was a friend from college who might help him with a business deal. I didn't realize until now." There was a bitter taste in my mouth I couldn't quite name. Not jealousy. Not even betrayal. Just a hollow, disgusted ache. He'd been softening the ground with our son, preparing a future that excluded me without ever saying it outright. But this wasn't about revenge anymore. It hadn't been since the moment Caleb brought me those screenshots. This was about ending their ability to hurt us and anyone else ever again. Elena's panic didn't take long to spread. Her family, old money, and even older secrets tried to contain the fallout. I heard through a contact in the zoning board that her father personally called city council to complain about the slanted media agenda targeting his daughter. Didn't matter. I had already filed a formal complaint with the Attorney General's office. And I'd sent a package of evidence to the head of the Charity Oversight Committee. By the end of the week, Elena's accounts were frozen, her organization under investigation, and her family's financial assets tangled in legal red tape. At a press conference, one reporter asked about the woman behind the whistleblowing. A spokesperson from the Tribune said, "Anonymous source, but one clearly familiar with the inner workings of both Hale Development and the Ward Foundation." Good. Let them guess. Let them wonder which quiet, powerful woman they'd overlooked while fawning over boardroom charisma and charity galas. Tessa stopped by that night. She leaned against my kitchen counter, arms crossed, watching as I reheated leftover pasta for Caleb. "You stacked the deck," she said. "No," I replied, plating the food. "I built the deck." "Still," she added with a wry smile, "remind me never to cheat on you." I gave her a look. "Don't worry. You're safe." After Caleb had eaten and gone to bed, I sat with Tessa on the balcony, both of us sipping wine beneath the stars, the city humming below us like a sleeping beast. "Do you feel better?" she asked. "No," I said honestly. "But I feel closer to done." She nodded. "Then keep going." And I would. Because this wasn't the end. Not yet. This was the opening move. And I hadn't even played my queen. I knew they'd retaliate. People like Nathan and Elena don't go quietly, they squirm, scream, claw. They pretend to be victims the moment power slips from their fingers. So when the divorce papers came in from Elena's lawyers, not Nathan's, Elena's, accusing me of psychological cruelty and sustained emotional abuse, I wasn't surprised. I was impressed. She filed first. She thought it gave her narrative control. I sat at the long walnut conference table in my attorney's office, flipping through the documents. Her claims were a fiction of the highest order, that I'd manipulated Nathan, threatened to withhold Caleb, used my wealth to coerce silence. It read like a villain's manifesto, the kind crafted with crocodile tears and a PR firm's ghostwriter. Do they really think this will stick? I asked, sliding the packet back across the table. My attorney, a lean, sharp-eyed woman named Marla Chong, smirked. They're not trying to win in court. They're playing for headlines. I leaned back in my chair. Then let's give them better ones. Caleb came home from school that afternoon with a letter in his backpack. It wasn't from a teacher. It was from Elena. I recognized the envelope immediately. She always used cream stationery, the kind with embossed initials and the faintest whiff of rose perfume. Caleb had opened it already. I found it lying on his desk, half-read, half-crumpled, like he couldn't decide whether to rip it or burn it. It said things like, "You're still my boy, and I made mistakes, but I never stopped loving you." I stared at the words like they were a foreign language. When he walked into the room, I turned to him, careful not to let the fury show on my face. "Did you read it?" I asked softly. "Yeah," he said, not meeting my eyes. It made me feel sick. "She's trying to manipulate you." "I know." There was a long pause. Then he said, "Can I write her back?" I swallowed. "Of course." He went to his desk, pulled out a fresh sheet of paper, and wrote in silence. When he finished, he handed it to me without a word and walked away. The letter was 2 sentences long. "You lost the right to call me your boy the moment you lied to my mother. Don't contact me again." I didn't change a word. We mailed it that evening. I never saw Caleb's hands shake once. The next day, Nathan made his first public appearance since the scandals broke. A tepid charity brunch, one of the smaller events Elena hadn't been disinvited from yet. Cameras caught him trying to smile, trying to charm. But the crowd around him had thinned. He looked bloated and gray, like scandal had bloated him from the inside out. He didn't know I was there. I stood near the back, dressed in black silk, sunglasses hiding my expression, watching him from the corner of the room like a ghost he couldn't shake. He caught sight of me once, just once, and I saw the flicker in his eyes. The unease. The realization that I wasn't running. I wasn't hiding. I was hunting. Later that night, I received a message from him. Not an apology. Not remorse. Just this. "You win. Happy now?" I didn't reply. Winning wasn't the point. The point was truth. The point was Caleb. The point was proving that I had always been the one holding everything together, and now I would be the one deciding what broke apart. Tessa came by with takeout, and we ate in the kitchen, watching as more news rolled across the screen. Elena's foundation had been suspended pending a full audit. Nathan's licensing board had issued a preliminary suspension. "It's all falling apart," she said between bites of pad thai. "Good. But they're not done." "I know." Elena's family had already begun circling the wagons. Word had spread through legal circles that they were digging into every inch of my past, looking for weaknesses. I wasn't worried. I had no skeletons, just blueprints, just deals and power plays. And everything I did in my name, with my eyes wide open. That was the difference between me and Elena. She lied behind glass. I built mine into skyscrapers. But still, I prepared. Quietly, efficiently. I hired a cybersecurity team to sweep my devices. I transferred Caleb's school records into private systems. I had my assistant monitor social mentions and press leads for slander, ready to counter anything that surfaced. And through it all, I stayed calm. In public, I smiled. I signed deals. I hosted a women in business luncheon and gave a speech about resilience. I kissed cheeks and shook hands. No one saw the war behind my eyes. But behind the scenes, I tightened every bolt, sealed every crack. Let them scramble. Let them claw. The more noise they made, the more desperate they looked. And I stayed silent. I stayed sharp. Because I didn't need to convince anyone of my innocence. I just needed them to see the truth. And when it finally came crashing down, no one would mistake who had kept her hands clean and who had tried to drag everyone into the dirt. It started with a call from Marla at 6:13 a.m. "Monica," she said, her voice clipped but calm. "Nathan attempted to access the company servers at 3:42 a.m. Our security team caught it mid-sweep. He tried to wipe financial records, your records." I sat up in bed, heart thudding. Was he successful? No. The sweep stopped the breach before he could encrypt or erase anything. But it triggered a protocol. We filed an emergency injunction. I didn't need to ask what that meant. Nathan was no longer playing defense. He was spiraling. That late-night stunt? It wasn't strategy. It was desperation. "Thank you, Marla," I said. "Let me know when you hear more." After I hung up, I sat in the silence of my room, listening to the faint hum of the city waking outside my window. The blinds were still drawn, the morning still young, but I could feel the pulse of it. Chicago was stirring. So was the storm. By the time I reached the kitchen, Caleb was already at the table, earbuds in, eating cereal while scrolling through his tablet. He looked up and pulled one bud out. "Something wrong?" I smiled, but it didn't quite reach my eyes. "Just adult stuff. Nothing for you to worry about." He gave me a long, quiet look. "They'll never win, right?" I placed a hand on his shoulder. "They never had a chance." I dropped him at school and drove straight to the district courthouse. Tessa was already waiting on the front steps, coffee in hand, her badge clipped at her hip. "They took him in 20 minutes ago," she said without ceremony. "Federal marshals. You won't get a good mugshot. It's being sealed for now." "But he's rattled." "Bad." "What's the charge?" "Obstruction. Tampering with federal records. The DA's office is calling it preemptive destruction of financial evidence under the wire fraud statute." I exhaled slowly. "That's a felony." Tessa nodded. "Multiple counts, potentially. And if they uncover more about his laundering, this is just the beginning." We walked through the lobby without another word. I didn't go inside the courtroom. I didn't need to. Nathan wouldn't be arraigned today. This was just a holding maneuver. Let him stew in it. Later that day, the media frenzy reignited. Word of his arrest leaked through unofficial channels, probably some intern with a grudge or a reporter's well-placed source. Real estate developer Nathan Hale arrested in federal records tampering probe. The headline was cold, clinical, devastating. By evening, social media was on fire. Some commenters defended him, those who still believed in the family man image. But most? They smelled blood. I turned off my phone. I didn't need to hear the noise. Instead, I sent him one message. Just one. "You wanted Elena. You got her." Live with it. No punctuation. No signature. Just the truth. I imagined him reading it from a holding cell, alone, the walls closing in. I imagined him picturing Elena's face as her family pulled away, as her bank accounts dried up, as the legacy she tried to build on lies crumbled into ash. That was the woman he chose. That was the future he risked it all for. Good. Let them have each other. That night, Tessa came over again. She brought Thai food and a bottle of red. We sat in my apartment, the windows open to the late spring breeze, the air cool and full of city sounds. The apartment still smelled faintly of fresh paint and lemon polish. "I saw the arrest paperwork," she said between sips. "He named Elena as a co-conspirator." I raised an eyebrow. "Threw her under the bus already?" "With both hands." I shook my head slowly. "She'll come for him now." Tessa smiled. "Let her. By the time they're done tearing each other apart, there won't be anything left to rebuild." She was right. They had played their hand. I had waited, silent and calculating, while they made mistake after mistake. And now the world was watching the fallout. Neither of them knew how to lose gracefully. Neither of them knew how to rebuild from ruin. But I did. I looked over at Caleb, curled up on the couch, half asleep with a book on his chest. His brow was furrowed even in rest, like he was carrying the echoes of everything he'd witnessed, everything he was too young to understand. I would fix that. I would clear the air he breathed, the soil he stood on. I wouldn't let his name be one that people whispered about in pity. He deserved better than that. Before bed, I knelt beside him and brushed the hair from his forehead. "You okay?" I whispered. He nodded slowly. "You don't have to fight forever, Mom." I kissed his temple. "I'm almost done." Because I was. The worst was behind us. The empire I had built was still intact. My son was safe. The truth had surfaced. And Nathan was finally right where he belonged. I stood by the window one last time that night, glass of wine in hand, watching the city lights blink like stars. Somewhere out there, Nathan was alone. Elena, too. Their masks were gone. And me? I was just getting started. The first time I saw Nathan's face on national television, it didn't feel triumphant. It felt surgical. Clean. Necessary. The news anchor spoke in a voice soaked in grim professionalism, the kind they reserved for scandals involving names that once graced magazine covers. Nathan's mugshot flashed onto the screen, his expression haggard, his once meticulously groomed beard grown uneven, his suit wrinkled like he hadn't taken it off in days. Gone was the man who used to spend 30 minutes every morning gelling his hair to perfection, ensuring not one strand defied him. Nathan Hale, former CEO of Hale Development, the anchor said, has been formally indicted on multiple counts, including wire fraud, obstruction of justice, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit charity fraud. Federal prosecutors are expected to seek the maximum sentence, citing extensive evidence of financial tampering and deliberate concealment. And just like that, the curtain dropped. I stood in my kitchen, the muted TV flickering against the dark marble, watching his name become a cautionary tale. The same man who once paraded me around charity galas like a trophy was now a felon in waiting. And it didn't end with a single headline. Over the next week, more layers peeled back. His state developer's license was suspended indefinitely. His seat on the Real Estate Oversight Board was vacated in shame. Civil suits poured in like water through a cracked dam. Former investors, business partners, even one of his own brothers-in-law joined the swarm. And then came the federal agencies. The FBI showed up at our old penthouse with a search warrant. The IRS followed days later. They didn't knock gently. I heard from Marla that Nathan tried to call me again, this time from his attorney's office. Left a voicemail I didn't bother listening to. He wanted to talk, to explain, maybe even beg. But I wasn't interested in redemption arcs. Especially not ones scripted too late. Meanwhile, in the court of public opinion, the fall was swift and merciless. Once the golden boy of Chicago real estate, Nathan Hale had been profiled in glossy lifestyle spreads, invited to speak at national developer conferences, featured on magazine covers with puff piece titles like Building Tomorrow Today. Now, those same magazines were publishing exposés about his downfall. Journalists combed through his entire career. Deals that had once raised eyebrows now came under intense scrutiny. Old colleagues gave anonymous quotes describing the warning signs they'd ignored. The cracks had always been there, they just needed someone willing to blow the whistle. And I had. Not with a scream. Not with a scandalous tell-all. But with quiet, patient precision. At the center of it all, people kept asking, where was Monica Harwood in all of this? I didn't speak to the press. I didn't tweet. I didn't posture. I showed up. I continued running my company. I donated $1 million to the city's new housing program, quietly, anonymously at first, then allowed my name to be attached when they asked for a quote. I wore navy suits and neutral lips and kept my voice calm. No theatrics. No tears. Calculated grace, the Chicago Tribune called it. Damn right. And yet, there were moments, quiet, surprising ones, when the weight of it all hit me sideways. At night, when Caleb was asleep and the city had quieted down to nothing but distant sirens and the hum of my fridge, I'd sometimes sit on the floor of my walk-in closet and remember. Not the betrayal. The beginning. The first time Nathan made me laugh. The way he used to surprise me with coffee when I worked through the night. The birthday card he wrote me the year Caleb learned to ride a bike. Memories aren't polite. They don't leave just because you told them to. But then I'd remember the voice I heard that night, the drunken, raw confession that I had never been the woman he truly wanted. That I was stability, safety, a backup plan. And suddenly, the silence felt like peace. Tessa was the one who gave me the final update I didn't know I'd been waiting for. We were walking through a development site together, one of my newer projects, a sustainable mixed-use block with green roofs and local business spaces. Caleb had gone to visit a college upstate with a few classmates, and I had thrown myself into work like it was medicine. Tessa's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, then smiled faintly and handed it to me. A headline. Hale Development declares bankruptcy. CEO's assets seized pending investigation. It felt inevitable. Not victorious. Not even satisfying. Just final. You did it, Tessa said. No, I replied. He did it to himself. But I had drawn the lines, set the traps, pulled the strings. Nathan had thought I was a pawn. Turns out I was the board. We stood together at the edge of the site, hard hats in hand, watching the sun rise over the future I had built from rubble. And I whispered, more to myself than anyone else, let them all underestimate me again. Because I wouldn't need to shout. I would rebuild. Bigger. Smarter. Unshakable. Elena Ward vanished in phases, like a socialite melting under a heat lamp. At first, she tried to hold her shape, still attending charity events, still wearing pearl earrings and Chanel flats like the headlines weren't slicing her reputation to ribbons. But even the best illusions can't survive when the light shifts. The first sign came when her family issued a statement, short, cold, and surgical. It read, "The Ward family distances itself from all allegations and will cooperate fully with investigators." Elena's actions do not reflect the values of this household. I read it twice, then closed the browser. It was over for her. For years, the Wards had used their name like armor, old money, political clout, high-rise connections. But there's a limit to how much even legacy can protect you when federal audits and embezzlement charges are on the table. Her father was on the board of 3 institutions. Within a week, he'd quietly resigned from all of them. I heard through a downtown investment broker that 2 major properties under the Ward Family Trust were being sold in a hush-hush fire sale. Elena was hemorrhaging everything. She tried damage control. A poorly edited video appeared online. Just her, sitting stiffly in a white chair, eyes a little too wide. I never knew what Nathan was really doing with the money, she claimed. I trusted him. We all make mistakes. But there were receipts, emails, wire transfers, her signature on payroll documents for non-existent staff, her approval on donation reroutes that led directly into Nathan's dead accounts. And no matter how many soft-lit apology videos she released, the public wasn't buying the act anymore. By mid-month, her name was removed from the foundation she once called her life's work. The charity had a new interim director and an entirely new board. One of their first moves? A full audit of the last 5 years. Another? Reaching out to me. The irony wasn't lost on me when I walked into their office for a meeting, an office she once ruled with manicured control. Now stripped of her portraits and pristine orchid arrangements, the space looked smaller. I sat at the head of the table like I belonged there because I did. We'd like you to serve in a consulting capacity, the board director said. Help us restructure, rebuild credibility. I agreed. Not out of revenge, but principle. I'd spent years building things that lasted. I wasn't about to let her ruin something that, at its core, had a real purpose. Meanwhile, Elena was evicted from her downtown apartment. Paparazzi photos showed her outside the marble lobby, holding her phone and wearing sunglasses too large for her face, as if she could hide behind plastic lenses. Her designer luggage was placed unceremoniously on the curb beside her. She fled Chicago days later. Miami. That was the whisper around the women's network I quietly helped fund. A cousin had a property. She was lying low, trying to find a new circle that hadn't read the headlines or didn't care. But circles remember, especially tight ones. She tried to attach herself to another nonprofit within months, something about mental health and recovery, but the board politely declined her application. And when she showed up to a second-tier gala, hoping to be seen, she was ignored. The camera flashes skipped her entirely. Caleb heard about it from a classmate who still followed gossip blogs. He showed me the photo, Elena, standing awkwardly near a bar table, alone in a glittering dress too bright for her mood. "Do you think she regrets it?" he asked. "Does it matter?" I replied, gently closing the screen. That night, he came into the living room holding a single sheet of paper. His handwriting, neat, sharp, filled the center of the page. "I want to send her this," he said. It read, "Biology means nothing when character is empty. You don't get to call yourself a mother when you lie to your child for years. Please lose my number." I read it once, then again, and felt a slow, bittersweet pride settle into my chest. "You don't have to send it," I said. "She doesn't deserve your energy." "I know," he replied, "but I need to say it." We mailed it the next morning. No return address. Just a white envelope with her name. Elena didn't respond. But a few days later, Caleb came into the kitchen and said, "I feel lighter." That was enough. Her ruin wasn't about headlines or headlines. It wasn't about seeing her fall. It was about reclaiming space she'd once stolen with lies and performance. She had tried to destroy 2 lives, mine and Caleb's, for the sake of a fantasy built on nostalgia and vanity. Now she lived on the outskirts, clinging to scraps of a world that no longer wanted her. And us? We were building something better. 1 year later, the light felt different. It was brighter, warmer, not just in the weather, but in the way the world opened up again. There were no more voicemails left unheard, no more panic texts from Nathan, no more quiet dread waiting to settle over my mornings. The silence that filled my life now wasn't hollow, it was peaceful. Earned. The scars were still there, of course. They always would be. But they had faded into something dignified, like old architecture that held stories instead of shame. I stood on the rooftop terrace of the new Harwood Center for Community Wellness, a structure that had once been Elena's scandal-ridden nonprofit. It now bore a new name, a new mission, and an entirely new soul. The skyline stretched out before me, tall and unbothered, a city I'd once helped build now reflecting a version of me I could finally recognize again. Caleb stood beside me, taller now, broader in the shoulders, with the same quiet intelligence in his eyes he had since he was a boy. He was home from college for the weekend, pre-law, top of his class, and already mentoring incoming freshmen. He held a cup of coffee like he was older than me and wiser than most men twice his age. "I remember when this building used to smell like lavender disinfectant and cheap guilt," he said, glancing around. I laughed. "Now it smells like fresh paint and possibility." We walked down into the main floor lobby together. There were kids in scrubs shadowing the nurses, volunteers sorting through community health kits, and 2 grant writers deep in a planning session near the back office. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, tangible, transparent. And it ran on integrity, something Elena's version of the organization had never known. Tessa walked up the hallway toward us, clipboard in hand, sharp as ever in her tailored blazer and boots. We hadn't put a label on us, not in the traditional sense. But she was mine. Not because I needed her to be. Because I chose her. And every day, we chose each other again. "We've got a meeting with the city council at 3, she said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "They want to expand the wellness program into 3 more neighborhoods." "Good," I replied. "Let them know we're ready." Tessa smiled at Caleb. He's still the youngest person I've ever seen walk into a grant strategy meeting and make grown men stutter. Caleb grinned. "That's the Harwood legacy." He said it like a joke, but there was truth in it. He wasn't defined by DNA. He was defined by choice, by resilience, by the fire we walked through together. When people found out he wasn't biologically mine, they always paused like it mattered. But love was never in the blood, it was in the everyday. The long nights, the hard talks, the choice to show up even when it hurt. And Caleb was mine. Every inch of him. I watched as he slipped away to talk to a group of interns, animated and confident, already giving more than I'd taught him. That boy, no, that man, was my greatest accomplishment. Tessa and I sat in my office, a sleek space lined with renderings of upcoming projects. Across the desk, A framed photo of Caleb and I from the new center's ribbon-cutting ceremony sat beside a glass sculpture that simply read, "Rebuild with Purpose." I leaned back in my chair and exhaled. "Do you ever think about them?" Tessa asked quietly. "Elena and Nathan?" She nodded. "Sometimes," I said. "Like you think about old bruises. You remember the shape, but not the pain." Tessa tilted her head. "Think they ever think about you?" "I hope so," I replied. "I hope they remember exactly what I look like when I'm done being underestimated." She laughed, low and warm. "That's cold." "No," I said, smiling. "That's power." Because I wasn't angry anymore. I didn't need them to pay. They already had. Nathan was somewhere in Arizona, trying to sell desert properties no one wanted, disbarred, disgraced, barely mentioned in conversations that once revolved around him. Elena, I heard, bounced from Miami to smaller circles in Savannah, hosting wellness luncheons for causes too vague to matter, her name no longer opening doors, but getting them quietly closed. Me? I rebuilt. I didn't just reclaim my place, I elevated it. My developments were greener, smarter. My charity work, more intentional. My staff, more diverse. I didn't want to go back to what life had been. I wanted better. At the center of it all stood Caleb. My legacy wasn't a skyline or a stock portfolio. It was him. That night, he came to my condo with takeout and stories from school. "You know," he said between bites, "some kid in my political ethics class said you're kind of a legend." I raised an eyebrow. "A legend?" He nodded. "The professor called your handling of the nonprofit transition one of the most efficient private-public restructures of the decade." I smiled. "That's generous. You deserve it." I reached across the table, took his hand in mine. "You're the only legacy I ever cared about." He didn't respond with words. He just squeezed back. That was all I needed. 10 years. That's how long it had been since the night Nathan drunkenly confessed I was never his first choice. 10 years since I stood in the hallway of our penthouse, unseen and unshaken, and decided to disappear not as a broken wife, but as a strategist ready to build something no one could touch. Now, standing at the top floor of the Harwood Tower, the tallest sustainable smart building in downtown Chicago, I could see every square mile of the empire I'd carved from the ashes. It was early, just past 6 in the morning, and the skyline stretched out in front of me like a quiet kingdom. The city had changed, grown bolder, more efficient, more humane. We had built affordable housing that didn't compromise on dignity. Health centers that actually reached underserved communities. And infrastructure that worked for people, not just politicians or investors. It bore my fingerprints, yes. But it also bore the principles I'd instilled in those who now carried it forward. The office behind me was humming to life, assistants arriving, emails chiming, voices carrying through glass. But this hour, this view was mine. I turned as the door opened and Caleb stepped in. He'd outgrown me in height years ago, but his posture still held the grace of someone who knew his roots and revered them. "Boardroom's ready," he said. "Mayor wants to pitch that South Side infrastructure expansion." I raised an eyebrow. "And you?" He shrugged, lips twitching. I already told him our priorities don't shift just because someone needs a re-election headline. I grinned. "That's my boy." "No," he said, smirking. "That's your legacy." He was a full-grown attorney now, Harvard Law, first in his class, head of a foundation that bore both of our names. But he still visited my office every morning before major meetings, sometimes for guidance, sometimes just for coffee and a shared silence. "You nervous?" I asked, motioning toward the boardroom. "Not really," he said. "But I was thinking about Dad this morning." I paused. "Why?" "Because I realize now how small he made himself. Not because of what he did, but because of what he refused to grow into." That struck me in a way I didn't expect. Caleb had never spoken about Nathan with bitterness. But today there was something sharper in his tone. Not cruel, just honest. "He's still in Tempe, I think," Caleb added. I got a LinkedIn connection request from someone in his office. You didn't accept, did you? He laughed. Of course not. He's a footnote, not a chapter. I smiled at that, proud beyond words. Elena, as far as I knew, was still floating somewhere between failed ventures. Occasionally, she popped up in someone's social photo in Miami, always on the edges of the frame, never centered, never leading. Her days of power had faded into something like social survival. The last article I read about her mentioned a failed podcast, a business retreat that never launched, and a vaguely spiritual brand she had started but abandoned within a year. She had become what she feared most, forgettable. And me? I was at the top. But not alone. Tessa walked in next, tablet in one hand, hair pulled back in a sleek twist that made her look as composed as she'd been the day we met again. She leaned in, kissed my cheek, then turned to Caleb. You ready to remind the mayor that your mother's time isn't a prop? Caleb snorted. Already did. He offered parking validation in return. We all laughed. This quiet, shared power was the most precious thing I'd ever built. Not towers, not wealth, not even reputation, but continuity. A life that didn't fracture under betrayal, but reformed stronger. As the meeting began and suits filled the boardroom, I took my seat at the head of the table. There were more wrinkles at the corners of my eyes now, more gray laced through my curls. But there was also peace and control and pride that didn't need to be spoken aloud. The mayor greeted us with a polished smile, but I saw the shift in his eyes when he looked at me. People didn't mistake kindness for weakness anymore. Not when it came from me. After the meeting, as the room cleared, Caleb lingered behind. Do you ever think about what you'd say to them? If they stood here now, Dad, Elena. I considered the question. I imagined them in this gleaming space, dwarfed by the glass and light and the weight of the things they couldn't destroy. I'd say nothing, I finally replied, because nothing says more than this. Caleb nodded slowly, then looked around the office. I think I get it now. Strength isn't about fighting. No, I said, smiling softly. It's about surviving with your soul intact. It's about building when they expect you to break. He walked out ahead of me, shoulders square, purpose in every step. And I stayed for a moment, soaking in the quiet hum of legacy. Strength isn't loud. It's patient. It's watching the empire they tried to steal become the monument to your endurance. And when it finally strikes, it leaves no survivors.